The practice I want to talk with you about right now is the practice of testimony. And most of us are probably familiar with the various ways that testimony is practiced. People will very often stand before a church community and share a story of faith, a story of God's work in that person's life. And we call that giving testimony. I grew up in a church where that was very, very common practice, a little terrifying for a young kid like myself to actually do it, but I did it a few times. Another way of thinking about testimony is when a person sits in the docket in a courtroom, bearing witness to what has been seen, what has been experienced in order to provide evidence in a court case. That too is a way of giving testimony. So when we think of testimony, we think of people speaking something that they believe to be true. Hopefully they actually believe it, and that they wish to offer to others as a basis for that person's belief. And this applies to many areas of life. Well, think for a moment, what are the things that we have come to believe? Things that we believe to be true. There are a lot of things that we've come to believe. For example, we believe that the earth revolves around the sun. We believe that John F. Kennedy, who was the President of the United States, was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. We believe that Jesus Christ was born, lived, suffered, and died, and was resurrected from the dead. Well, how do we come to believe that things like this are true in the first place? Well, there's several ways that we come to believe on certain items. We believe because of first-hand evidence. We believe something happened because we were there. We witnessed it happening. If you were standing on the grassy knoll in Dallas in November of 1963, you might have witnessed the experience, the assassination of President Kennedy. We might believe on the basis of second-hand information. We might hear someone else tell the story of something they experienced. Maybe they were standing on that grassy knoll. We weren't, but they were, and we've come to believe their story. Or there's third-hand information, a story that's passed on and passed on and passed on by trusted witnesses. So how do we come to believe things as true that are conveyed to us strictly as testimony? You may have heard the name Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century scholar of the church. Aquinas said that most of what we claim to know about the world comes to us by way of testimony, that is, by the words of trustworthy witnesses. Now, in our time, we can think of examples of this. We can see that matter is made up of lots and lots of tiny particles, atoms, molecules, and so on. That Mars is an uninhabited planet, much to the disappointment of many of us. That swans are monogamous and often mate for life. If you don't learn anything else from this presentation, at least you've learned a little something about swans. Now, I don't believe any of these things because of first-hand knowledge. I base my belief in the testimony by the experts who assure me that these things are indeed true. Aquinas would say that belief based on credible testimony results in justifiable knowledge. If I consider the testimony of the experts on matter, space, and birds to be credible, then I can feel comfortable in believing that their testimonies are true. But not all testimonies make valid claims that would result in justifiable knowledge. For example, let's say that we have a friend who lives here in California in San Diego. She calls us on the phone and she claims that there's a giraffe in her backyard. Now, if we think that she's a credible witness, then we might take her seriously. Of course, we might need also to talk with some neighbors, check in with the animal control people, but we would do so with a desire to validate our friend's claim if, under normal circumstances, we would consider her to be credible. However, if we happen to know that our friend is currently vacationing in New Zealand while claiming to see a giraffe in her backyard in San Diego, we might pause. And when we bring that up to her, she explains that she just now had a feeling that there was a giraffe in her backyard in San Diego at that moment. Now, regardless of her testimony, we would probably not use that testimony as a basis for our own belief. Testimony begins with experience. We experience something ourselves, or we hear testimony about what someone else has experienced. Once the experience has occurred, propositional statements about the experience emerge. For example, if you were to witness an automobile accident, the propositional statement that you could claim is something like this: the blue car ran the red light and crashed into the yellow car. That's a statement of proposition about what you have experienced. On a more theological level, John, the apostle, having experienced what he experienced, what he had seen with his eyes and touched with his hands regarding Jesus Christ, would say with confidence, God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. Propositional statements like these are accepted as true when the witnesses are trustworthy and when we are already believing something about the authority or credibility of the propositions. Now, returning to our friend with the giraffe, it seems unlikely that she really has a giraffe in her backyard in San Diego, even though she has made a propositional statement to us about the giraffe's presence. She has said, there is a giraffe in my backyard. However, if just before she calls us on the phone, we hear on the radio that several giraffes have just escaped their enclosures in the San Diego Zoo and have run off into the surrounding neighborhood where our friend lives, then we are already prepared to receive her testimony as true. When people come to believe that God has revealed himself to human beings and that the witness of our scriptures is trustworthy, then the language of Christian testimony and the description of faith experiences expressed in propositions like, God loves me, or my sins are forgiven, or I am no longer a slave to sin, or God is light, or once I was blind, but now I see. The hearer may believe that the testimony is true, embrace it as a personal possibility, and even experience a deep sense of God's love and forgiveness. From that experience, then, comes a new and fresh testimony from the hearer. In closing, listen to these words about the nature, the deep structure of Christian testimony. Christian witness is an attestation to the reality of the resurrection of Christ in that it maintains that Christ is not only knowable as a historical occurrence, but as an abiding reality. Therefore, a consequence of the claim that Christ is risen and is thus alive is that he can surprise us, that he can be known, but because he is living and will act freely, he cannot be anticipated or predicted. The resurrected Christ must be attested by a people who expect him to exercise the freedom that comes with living. If you haven't done it already, you will experience some providing of testimony in your autobiography groups, where you'll talk about your own experience in Christian community. You'll be bearing witness in your own way to the way God has worked in your life through Christian community. And when you do this, there will be hearers with you that will hear your story and have the opportunity for their own faith to come alive in new ways. Thanks, and God bless you.